Well, welcome back to the PDP Dairy Signal. On behalf of professional dairy producers, we're certainly glad that you've joined us. And today we're going to talk about all things when we come to getting important data points for our farm, specifically in regards to our environmental management. I have two of some of our favorite experts that we've worked with, third-party assessors that have been honing their skills for many years. Not only are they people that love agronomy and have had their feet in the dirt on farms and dirt under their fingernails working with us as farmers, but they definitely understand the tools that are out there to help us gather those data points and be more sustainable in our dairy operations. So we're going to talk about environmental modeling tools today, how they can be used for you to make you more efficient and to give you pertinent information for your dairy. I'm going to remind all of you that this program is as impactful and for you is what you make it. If you're live streaming with us, go ahead, use the question format, raise a hand, and make sure that you pop in as part of the discussion. That way you can really get this information tailored to you. If you're listening on a recording and you want additional information, you will find contact information following the presentation or at any time. Like always, the rules with professional dairy producers is give us a call, drop us an email. We work for you. So, who do we have today? Well, it's not only who do we have and what are their credentials when we're talking about the environmental modeling tools and their expertise, but I want to know something interesting about each of them. So, I will start with their names and their titles, and they're going to tell me about their backgrounds and how the heck they found themselves into this segment of agriculture. First, we're going to start with Carson Duggar. Carson, I've worked with you a lot now. I think it was probably about December of 2003, maybe January, February of 2004, or excuse me, 24. We haven't worked together quite 20 years.
Yep.
We've worked together maybe 2 or 3 years. That I first met you. You're an agronomist with EOC Environmental Group. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where did you grow up? Why do you love agriculture? And how did this all come together?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shelley. And yeah, working with professional dairy producers, we've worked for a couple of years together, but maybe it's felt like 20 or 25 years we've got that relationship going. But yeah, hi everybody. I'm Carson Duggar, and I'm a lead agronomist with EOC Environmental Group. So I grew up in Southeast Iowa, went to Iowa State, go Cyclones, in agronomy, and then have a background in ag retail sales. So I'm kind of a homebody, grew up here in Pella, and then went to school and came right back, moved back here to my hometown and worked for the local co-op doing fertilizer, chem, seed sales with farmers here. And through that process, as Shelley mentioned, some of the dirt under my fingernails is really the day in and day out of visiting farms, cold calling guys, working in the fields, operating equipment, doing that sort of thing on the agronomy side. A few years ago, I transitioned into EOC Environmental Group, where we do a lot less of the dirt under the fingernails approach of things, but a lot of the same work as far as you're talking to farmers, talking about what's going on the farm, and maybe identifying some opportunities for advancing conservation and environmental numbers on the farm as well.
Okay. Next is my friend Grace Moeller, and she's the livestock specialist with the EOC Environmental Group. Grace, share some interesting facts about yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you today, Shelley. Grace Moeller. I am originally from Columbus, Ohio. My family's from Iowa, but I was born and raised in Columbus. I went to Ohio State for undergrad, majoring in zoology and had a minor in dairy science. And all throughout college was when I worked on dairy farms. So I had more manure under my fingers than dirt from the field, but gained a lot of my dairy experience there. And then I went to Iowa State for grad school. So I completed my master's in animal science, focusing more on animal welfare. And then I'm currently completing my PhD. We're almost at the finish line in animal science as well at Iowa State. And so I joined EOC in last May, I believe. So working with our dairy producers, after working in the swine world, I was eager to get back to working with dairy producers and with the lens that I have of, focusing on animal welfare. When we think about animal health and welfare, those are going to be our most sustainable animals. And so having the kind of the data background that I have as well, I'm able to kind of marry all those things together, working with these environmental tools and with our producers all across the country.
All right. I had an opportunity to work with both of you guys. It's very, as a dairy farmer myself, very comforting when I work with people that that just naturally have come up through agriculture, either because they grew up in it or a selection of choice, and have really dived into the study of the science, and both have had their boots on the ground. And you guys definitely pass all those tests. And when we've worked together, you understand your way around a dairy farm very well and are committed to helping our people be successful. So thanks for being here with us today. We're excited about this. So, when we talk about environmentally modeling tools, if I'm brand new to this discussion, what the heck is that? Carson, give me a quick synopsis.
Yeah, absolutely. And really this is yeah, some of the big kind of maybe scarier sustainability words that get thrown around, but ultimately we'll talk about it today is these are just ways to measure the emissions impact of your farm and then have really great breakdowns, and by working with us we can have some insights into where emissions are coming from on your farm, and then what potential management practices we could change here and there to potentially ultimately have a lower emissions footprint.
Why would I want to know my data point on my carbon footprint and even have any idea where I sit on emissions? Is that just opening up a can of worms and raising my hand and saying I'm guilty of a global crime? What is it?
Yeah, and there's definitely around the sustainability conversation in general, some fear from farms that could be exactly right, that we're opening up ourselves up to, yeah, pointing the finger back at us. But really, at the end of the day, we work with a lot of different farmers, really coast to coast in here in America, and farms have a better story to tell. And we really try to empower farms to use the numbers that we can gain with these different environmental modeling tools to tell that story, so that we have the data points to back it up when the story is being told for us in some cases.
Well, that was a huge rhetorical question for my listeners that I asked there, because what we know professional dairy producers learned from doing a pilot program late in 2023 is that our farms, our dairy farms in the US, when we look at how they would compare with their colleagues globally, US dairy farmers have a lot to gain, and a lot to really lead with in the discussion on sustainability. And by gathering that data point of proof, you can prove that you are the most sustainable presently in the world, and that the lowest on emissions, because we're very efficient at producing our product. We know how to make a lot of milk without a lot of impact. So the opposite is true. You have an opportunity to stand out as the leader and take a stand and actually guide the discussion. So without any more delay, I'm going to turn the controls 100% over to Carson and Grace. They're going to talk about environmental modeling tools. I want you guys to all, and gals that are listening, to think about your own farms and the information that you presently know. We have so much data on our farms that sometimes I think it's just you can drown in it. Your nutrient management plans and crop yields and cow yields and just the numbers that we manage with all the time. Think about the spreadsheets and analysis, that data points that every farm, regardless of size, has. So now, what do you have to do to gather all this information? Who do you go to? And then what happens to that data? I mean, you have this whole thing about it's my farm. Whose business is it? First, to know those numbers, it's mine. And then where might that data also go if I have someone else help me? I want you guys to think about those questions as Carson and Grace walk us through these environmentally modeling tools. And Carson and Grace, you both have worked with the initiative Your Farm, Your Footprint.
Mhm.
So as you jump in and start talking about the different modeling tools out there, make sure that we keep it applicable to a farm that maybe has not been part of the pilot or already went through that process of getting their carbon footprint. I'm going to hand it over. Boom.
Very good. No, thanks. That was a great intro. And one more slide that we do have here is a more formal intro slide. So we obviously talked about ourselves and our background, but this is a great chance for me, obviously, to share about my family a little bit. So I am in my home office here in Pella, Iowa, about an hour east of Des Moines today. And then I do not have my wife and baby here today. They're visiting friends now and giving me some peace and quiet. But have an 18-month-old little boy that is has definitely been a joy for us so far, obviously.
And what kind of things is that little guy doing now? Is he running the house?
Oh, very much so. He is a wild child. So he is like 100% energy all the time. Our big thing right now is cars. So we have a growing list of or a growing pile of Hot Wheels cars that is his current fixation.
That's awesome. He needs a herd of cows, my friend, a herd of cows. Grace, who's that friend you have with you?
That is my dog, Angus. He goes by Gus, though, for the most part. He's a almost 3.5-year-old German short hair. So he keeps me very busy, and we stay active, doing all kinds of outdoor things.
And
So
what kind of training has Gus had? Does he have special titles and acronyms behind his name as well? I mean, is he working on a PhD or what does this dog really specialize in?
we've done some canine good citizen work and done the advanced for those as well. He's done some of the other AKC programs, but no formal hunting training. We're just kind of winging it.
Okay, those that know Grace knows that Grace doesn't do anything halfway. So that's why I knew this was going to be the best trained dog in town. All
We're
right, guys.
trying.
What we're saying to you is you've got real people who understand across the fence of a farmer and they know their field. So you guys take it from here.
All right, awesome, awesome. So I've got a few slides here just to introduce everybody listening here to who Eocene is and what we do. So in reality, we can think we're kind of the middleman. We're selling the service that is all things sustainability throughout the supply chain. So we've got two kind of big buckets that our clients reside in. One is working with consumer packaged good companies and different brands that are interested in knowing up the supply chain, the farms that they're sourcing ingredients from, what some of those different environmental emissions intensities look like for environmental reporting, for market development, some of those different things on more of the corporate side. Second bucket that our clients fall into is our work with a bunch of different trade groups like professional dairy producers, where we're really looking for the ultimate goal of education for farmers so that we can empower them to advocate for themselves with these different numbers. Like Shelly talked about, it's kind of a nebulous area, it can seem like sometimes, but really when we use real farm data through these different environmental modeling tools, we get really great numbers and really great insights that can be used to advocate for one's farm. So we are also a true third party, which means that we do not have any products that we are selling back to a farm. So we're interested, we're not even interested in some of the conservation practices that you are doing or pushing more conservation practices for your farm. Really just interested in collecting the real, most accurate data from your farm, running it through these environmental modeling tools, and then sitting down with the farm one-on-one, doing that reporting on the back end to show where emissions are coming from throughout your dairy or throughout your fields.
So what you're saying is you're not selling anything.
Exactly. Yeah, we make money with the service. We don't have any products. We're not selling data anywhere. I mean, everything is very much kept in-house. We're just interested in ultimately the education and advocacy piece for the farm. Really farm forward, farmer focused for sure.
So when I worked with you guys, I would liken you almost equivalent to something totally different that we've all experienced, kind of like a tax advisor or someone that I would take my farm records to and you would crunch numbers to get me my final reports that I would submit.
Yeah, and I've definitely had that feedback from some of the farms that we've worked with through the Your Farm, Your Footprint initiative. Is on the dairy, we have an agronomist and a nutritionist and a tax professional, and being linked up with Eocene through the Your Farm, Your Footprint initiative, you kind of have a sustainability professional as well to bounce questions off of, to talk about different practices, programs that your farm might be interested in the broader conservation sustainability space.
So when I worked with you guys, handing over the data that I had or sharing the data that I had on my farm seemed to me a whole lot less painful than tax season. So if I scared anybody with that, I didn't mean to, but that's kind of the analogy. My tax guy doesn't really he has a service to sell. And he's good in that field, but it's not like he is advocating or any certain practice in my management system.
Yep, yeah, no, and that is a good analogy for it, for sure. Yep. And one of the things that, at EOScene, thinking about data collection, the piles of data that you may have on your farm, we pride ourselves in our process, in the one-on-one time that we can get with farms to make sure that we have everything as accurate as possible.
Okay, that's awesome.
So as far as some of the work we do then and the tools that we use, oops, so skipped a slide there, but it's very broad-based in any type of agriculture. So we work with many different, again, consumer packaged good companies, trade organizations throughout all types of different animal ag, all different row crops and specialty crops. So really the tools that we're using are very recognized across agriculture and recognized pretty broadly geographically as well. So all the tools that we're using and we're going to talk about today are coming from the USDA, the NRCS. They're all really recognized and established. We're just, again, being the interim, being the hand-holding with the farm to get these different insights out of these different environmental modeling tools. So going into what we're actually going to be talking about today is this environmental emissions modeling. So we're going to start off just talking about some of the methodology behind modeling, what models are, then roll into some of the data needs that is going to take to run models with your farm data. And then finally, we'll look at the actual 3 different models that Grace and I work with day in and day out, and the 3 different models that your farm could be a part of with your farm, your footprint. So first here, thinking about some of the methodologies is our measuring environmental impact with a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 approach. So what this is looking at is just again, the methodology of how we can measure environmental emissions from our most basic, our tier 1, all the way to our most advanced over there in tier 3. So thinking about enteric methane emissions as an example, a tier 1 approach may be just taking our cow numbers on the farm times an emissions factor is going to give us our outcome. And so that's definitely, it's an easy way to do it. It's a practical way to do it, but that can't necessarily capture a lot of the nuance that comes with everything else that actually makes up enteric emissions on farm. If we switch over then to the tier 3 approach, this is where we get very specific in terms of how we're measuring things directly on farm. So for farms that have green feed systems, respiration chambers, putting masks on cows using infrared sensors to measure the actual methane emissions per cow or per farm would be a tier 3 approach.
Okay, before people quit listening, that is not the practical, and we don't have farms doing that, and don't worry about that.
Which is exactly my next point is we are not using a tier 3 approach. So while that may be the most precise, the most accurate way to do things, that's obviously not very practical for me to visit every single farm that's listening or interested in doing some different quantification, which is where we come to our exactly, which is where we come to our tier 2 approach, which is kind of taking the best of both worlds in terms of the practicality of tier 1 and some of the data that goes into the models, but then also some of the different science and the relationships that data has to do that different quantification with some of that tier 3 approach built into some of these different models through the research. So when thinking about models, it really boils down to computer engineers making software. And it's taking all of that different research from those different tier 3 approaches to give us something where we input farm data that we collect from you guys, from the farmers, and that is going to run through the models to give us these different emissions outputs. So again, this would be that tier 2 approach. It's the best of both worlds in terms of practicality and precision. There are some limitations as far as some of the underlying assumptions from the research, statistical uncertainty. There's always the question of data accuracy, making sure that not only we get the best data from the farm, but we enter it correctly in some of these different tools. And then thinking about the boundary of the farm. So what is being collected? Are heifers on site? Are they shipped off to a cattle ranch? Some of those different things, questions that, working with the tools day in and day out, we can help facilitate and make sure that we have the most accurate representation of the farm.
So we'll get there, guys. If you have not heard anything about this before and you feel like, holy smokers, we're way in the weeds, it's going to become more clear. So hang in there with us a little bit because that sounded way complicated. This is not.
And that's a good tie-in into this next slide, thinking about data collection and what it takes to run these different models. So when we think about data collection and data collection that we do with dairy farms, it really falls into two buckets again. We're going to have the dairy side of data and the field side of data. So anything looking through this list is data that you have on your farm, be it through a DairyCom, My John Deere type software, the spreadsheets that everybody loves to keep track of, or really just primary data responses in interview style that we do with farmers. So dairy data, things like milk production, manure management, herd size, and dynamics are all going to be included there. Flipping over to the field side, we get specific on field boundaries, as a lot of these tools use underlying soil and weather data from public resources, as well as just thinking about passes going across the field from our fall tillage through the spring fertilizer manure applications, planting, all the way through harvest in the fall.
So what you're saying is you're going to ask me questions about how I operate on the dairy, how my manures stored, managed, how many cows I have, how much milk they have, what's in my ration, what are some of the behaviors of how I'm managing if my cows get off of concrete, what are the grazing times of year,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
probably an estimate or a knowledge of how much diesel or energy I'm using, and maybe a look at my electric bills.
Yep. Yeah. And then that's exactly right. And typically data collection with a farm, we start out with an intro call where we identify as much as we can just in conversation, which you know your farm as best as anyone. You can answer a lot of these questions just off the cuff, and then follow up with working with your nutritionist to get rations, working with your agronomist to get different nutrient management plans or VRT spread maps. So things like that where we really try to collect data as it is, where it is. We pair you up with staff one-on-one to make sure that that data is being collected, the follow-ups, and we're making sure that we have everything, and really try to take the burden off the farm, put it on our agronomist or data specialist here at Eocene.
Probably all those numbers or all that information you have at your fingertips, off the top of your head, or exactly. The one that I thought was the most interesting that I hadn't really thought about was how many kilowatts of energy was using, but everybody pretty much knows how much diesel in a year because you're paying for it or you're booking it.
Yeah.
Again,
And I'm happy to make a call to your power company on your behalf. It's hit and miss if the power company will give me that information usually, but but that's definitely regardless of where this data is coming from, it's typically pretty accessible to run these different modeling tools.
and then on the field side, it's mostly everything that you need to know for your nutrient management and just the management and the records that you keep innately with your harvesting and your yields.
Absolutely, yeah. And especially when thinking about dairy and particularly the manure applications that come with it, usually the state DNR is going to have some type of nutrient management plan requirement that has all, if not most, of all of these field management practices that we're looking for.
Okay.
So that's what we're looking for data collection. So
I'm trying to take the scary out of that, Carson. Usually when I talk to producers, they're like, oh my goodness, like I need one more thing on my plate. And this is not one more thing. It's just a matter of knowing where the answers are.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's all data that you probably already have on your farm somewhere. Typically just a matter of acquiring it, shooting it over to us, and then again putting the burden on us and my team here at Eocene to sift through that, make sure that we're capturing the correct things for influencing these different models.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that too, we have a whole suite of different models, but data collection only happens once. So if we get our dairy data, we get our field data, that's enough for your farm to get all sorts of different environmental insights through these three particular tools. And that is what the rest of our presentation here is going to be running through this Eco Practices, Cool Farm Tool, and Farm ES platform, and showing how these models are working, what's some of the background, and then what environmental results that we're getting out of each one of them. Kicking out this first one, Eco Practices. So this is our internal platform, our data management platform but it is not the models that are being run here are all publicly available, all open source. So EcoPractices is the bigger water modeling tool that we do own and operate. But as far as some of the underlying models, we have Comet Farm from the USDA, which is going to get our GHG outputs, the Soil Conditioning Index, Russell 2 and WEPS for erosion nutrient tracking tool. So a whole full stack that we call it of different modeling tools that are all going to be using that similar field data to give us these different outputs in terms of net GHG emissions and soil carbon sequestration. So we can see in the inputs here, just field boundaries and those field management practices. This is a very, very field specific and even soil specific model. So none of the milk production, none of the manure management, the dairy stats are going to factor into this eco-practices model, really just looking at what emissions are coming from our field, along with some of these different environmental erosion, nutrient movement, et cetera, that's going on out in the field where we're producing feed for our dairies. And here's just an example of some of the insights that we can get from the reports through this EcoPractices tool. So again, thinking field specific, we have starting on the left-hand side, these in-field environmental outcomes showcasing net GHG emissions, soil carbon sequestration, and soil erosion rates for a field. Anything on here as well is actual dairy data that we have permission to use and showcase. But pretty typical here is we see that net GHG emissions, at least on the field side, is actually a negative, showing that we are sequestering more carbon than we are emitting through soil nitrous oxide processes. And that's really typical of what we see with dairies. Thinking about, there's lots of overwintering crops and cover crops grown that are then chopped for feed in the spring, as well as heavy manure use, which is going to really bolster that soil carbon sequestration number. So, here's just one of the things where even if you don't think you're doing great as far as conservation, as far as sustainability on your farm, if you're a dairy, which I'm sure you are listening to this, you might be surprised about what your numbers look like here on the field side of things.
AKA, we're not the problem, we're a big part of the answer.
Absolutely.
That's a really important thing for us to start to switch our thinking. And I think it's that thinking that everybody's telling us that we're a negative impact on the environment where we grow things. We're actually the biggest part of the answer to protecting our planet. And that's a really cool thing to know. And once you get your mind wrapped around that, this is our opportunity by working with these guys and having data point that now you can engage in the discussion and talk about your farm, but you're not just sharing the emotion and the story. You have data points that will come out of these models. You can prove it.
And that's exactly right. And here we can see with a couple of these different boxes, the in-field practice comparison impacts or the water quality savings. Our team also runs different scenarios. So comparing your farm, your actual results versus maybe the average, the typical, the conventional farm. And we can see for this one, there's lots of great stats there showing that this farm is operating much more sustainability, much more environmentally friendly compared to just the average conventional farm. So here again, to recap EcoPractices, this is very, very heavy, very specific on the field side of things. But now I'll turn it over to Grace. I'll be done talking now to talk about some of the different tools that are going to be more dairy specific.
Awesome. Thanks, Carson. So it's important for us. So obviously we think about the crops that we're growing on farm, and more often than not, we are feeding those to our cows. And so there's an integration component of the field to the dairy side, as you can see here. But with our two main dairy modeling tools, we have Cool Farm Tool and FarmES, and I'll get into some more specifics of those two tools. But in kind of thinking broadly about them, what we're going to take are these specific dairy inputs. We're going to take that crop data, and what we're going to get out of these tools is what's called a carbon intensity score. And so for one of the tools, so what we're going to look at is essentially the carbon dioxide equivalents that you emit per unit of fat protein corrected milk that your cows are producing. So it's going to take everything that's listed in the inputs box, and basically our denominator becomes energy corrected milk, and we're looking at the carbon intensity of that. And when we think about carbon dioxide equivalent, You've heard Carson mention nitrous oxide. So when we think about our greenhouse gases, it's nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and methane. And we index all of those down to carbon dioxide. And so that's why it's called carbon dioxide equivalent. And that basically kind of levels the playing field. So when we think about our dairy modeling, we're able to capture the methane, we're able to capture nitrous oxide emissions and just report it as one number. But so kind of, it's important to note when we think about your farm, your footprint, is that we're going to run all of these tools together because each tool is going to be able to provide us with different information. So as Carson mentioned with eco practices, you're going to get that specific field by field crop information. And we're going to get different inputs and these models kind of run differently, these two dairy tools. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute, but that's, it's important to kind of use them in tandem because they all have different strengths and they can all tell a different component of the story. Carson, you can go ahead and go to the next slide.
Well, you guys do that. So there's been mention of your farm, your footprint. And I didn't really do a very good job for folks that would be coming into this discussion of setting up your farm, your footprint. But in 2 sentences, your farm, your footprint is a dairy farmer-led initiative where we're partnering with Dairies Foundation, and Nestle has provided funding for any farmer from anywhere, dairy farmer, to get their baseline of where they are today on their carbon footprint. That was actually 4 sentences. And these tools that we're talking about, these models, are all utilized in helping you figure out that carbon footprint. And the third party that collects the data, who could give 2 shoots about what your number is, they're not going to share it with anybody other than you. They help you by making the data collection easy. You just have to answer the questions, and they know what to do with it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Shelley. And I think when we think about, so there's the data collection component, then we share our results with you. But then the next thing is, you look at your results and we kind of provide a baseline for, where they sit with other dairy farms that we see. But then if you want further guidance on how you can decrease that score and decrease your carbon footprint, we also can help with that. So we can identify practices that are going to be relevant for your specific farm. So, certain field management practices may not be relevant. Certain dairy, not everybody can have a digester on their farm. Not everybody has the cow capacity. And so we work specifically with you to identify what your goals are and to frame those goals and what is relevant and achievable for your farm. Shelley, any other comments though about your farm, your footprint?
Yeah, I think the other thing, so your farm, your footprint that we continue to reference is an initiative, and it's simply just to help farmers have the data point to know where their baseline of their farm is, not to compare it to any other farm, just their farm. The initiative uses these 3 tools, the COMET tool, FarmES tool, and the Cool Farm tool. The reason Cool Farm tool for a U.S. dairy farm is germane or important is that today 18% of our milk or milk substrates of the U.S. dairy industry go overseas. And it is an internationally recognized tool. So it kind of covered all of the bases.
Yep. And that's a great segue. When you kind of think about these different tools, like Shelley mentioned, it kind of, who your customer is going to drive. You'll see that there are different inherent, benefits to all of these tools. But so knowing who your customer is important to know, how we utilize these different models. And so like Shelley mentioned, Cool Farm tool is that internationally recognized tool. They are based out of the UK. And that model, uses tier 1 and tier 2 methodology. So Carson mentioned the tiers before. They use tier 1 and tier 2 methodology from the IPCC. And they're also using methodology from the IDF in 2022. So these are just kind of different inherent background things. And when I talk about FarmES, you'll kind of see how there's some differences there. And that's why the models aren't directly comparable and why we use them in tandem is because they have different inherent background components to them.
Okay. So I'm here just to be the translator. I'm going to talk it in cow language. Um, what we want to be able to do is to take our information and translate it into data points. But the first thing that I need to level up and that they taught me when we talk about our customer, AKA on the farm, our first customer is who we're selling our milk to, the first one up the chain. So your processor is your first customer. And then that processor has multiple customers. So my milk is going in most days into cheese in Wisconsin. Some days it goes directly into maybe cream that goes to Starbucks. Okay. But it mostly goes into hard cheese. So my processor then has multiple customers, and that's the next layer up. But what you as a dairy farmer need to know is when they're talking about customer here, your first customer is your processor, the one that sends you the milk jack.
Yep.
I always argue that my real first customer is my cow. That's who I serve first. And that is assumed here that my cows are happy because they're producing the product. And the second one is the one who's buying the product. I'm just kind of the middleman between the cow and the second customer.
There you go. Awesome. So just another kind of just a quick component of Cool Farm Tool is that it's an empirical model. So it's kind of, there's a simpler structure to it. There's a lot of equations and background data that's been collected and aggregated that's used in the background. With Cool Farm Tool, we also have the potential to do some basic scenario planning. So let's say, you know, on your farm, if you build, or let's say, you make upgrades to your parlor and you're expecting, you know, with improvements to pulsation and things like that, you know, cooling in the parlor, things like that, you're expecting that you would see a milk increase. We are able to then model that milk increase to see, because if you remember, your denominator in this equation is milk production. So if we increase production, our score will decrease. So that's something to kind of note there. But Carson, if you want to go to the next slide, we can kind of get into some specifics about Cool Farm Tool. So like Carson mentioned, obviously there's going to be our dairy data component and our crop data. And there's these inherent differences. So we collect all the data at once, and then it's our job to discern which pieces and parts go to which tools. So we're going to look at milk production. We're going to look at herd numbers by life stage. And those are what's considered to be on farm. So if you have your heifers at a site that's 3 miles down the road and you manage those, we would consider those on farm. If you ship them from Wisconsin to Kansas for the majority of their life and you get them back as springers, those would be considered off farm for the purposes of Cool Farm Tool. We're going to look at things specifically like the number of days, if you do graze, the number of days per year that they graze and the number of hours. The other really big component that's super important for us are those rations by life stage. So you may have a high and a low ration. You may have, you know, different rations for all your heifers, a far off and a close up dry cow ration. We want to collect all of those and we aggregate them by those life stages. So we'll look at lactating on its own, dry cows, heifers, calves, because that goes into that enteric fermentation component. So when we think about the inputs that are going into the cows, all that feed, and then the methane that comes out of it. So all the processes that are happening in that rumen is modeled by the feed products that you're feeding them. We can also look at feed additives. Oh, go ahead, Shelley, if you had a question.
No
sorry.
question. Lots of different options, a lot of different things that can have an impact on your number.
Yep. And so we'll look at that manure management, and in CFT, we're thinking of it as more of storage. So do you have a lagoon? Do you have a liquid slurry? Are your cows on a bedded pack? Your dry cows on a bedded pack? So we'll capture all of that information, the bedding sources that you use, and then like we talked about earlier, that energy. So any diesel, gasoline, propane, electricity that's used on farm to get you that end product is something that we will want to model. Thinking about the crop data, so what's really cool about Cool Farm Tool is that right now, well, what you can do in Cool Farm Tool is that you can take the crops that you're growing and create that feed product that you feed to your cows. So we're going to take all the information that Carson already collected and talked about. we take different pieces and parts of that, and we only need 1 year of data, but we create what's called a crop assessment. So for your corn silage acres, we will create a corn silage assessment, and then we can show that you are feeding your cows your specific corn silage. So the benefit of that is that if you are engaging in good management practices for from an environmental perspective, so things like no-till, cover crops, manure applications, those are going to be a more environmentally beneficial product than that conventional product that Carson talked about. So we have, full tillage, no cover crops, so you're, susceptible to a lot of erosion, different components there. And so when you can show the benefit of, because if you don't have the crops, then there's a purchased feed emissions component. And so that's higher. So when we're talking about how we can kind of decrease that overall score, feed is a big component of that. So then
Grace, those are the kind of keeping on the thing. It's not hard to get the data collected.
Yeah.
But once this information comes back, that's the richness of the discussion.
Yeah.
Is you have a data point now that you can start to look and ask the question, keeping in mind all those other facets of being a sustainable farm that we manage all the time. Like, you can't be in the green when you're in the red. So you can't do something that would just be environmentally so cool that it tanks you. I mean, the margins right now on the dairy are not great. They flat out kind of stink right now. So, you're going to be taking this data point, this information that you have, and with all these possibilities that you can spew out basing on how we can tweak things on our farm management wise.
Yeah.
But you still toss it as a farmer against what's doable, what's practical for me right now. Maybe you take some of these ideas and you pocket them away for a time when you do have some opportunities and some open field financially for thinking about the next step in your dairy expansion or bringing home that next generation, what they might want to change and do, and how then you can incorporate the knowledge you gain here to also lower emissions and increase efficiency. That's really what it is. It's like, how do I look at being more efficient with the whole model?
Yep, it's all a game of efficiency. And when you talked about, the cows before and kind of tying it back to animal welfare, those healthy cows are going to be more productive. And when we get more milk out, everybody wants more milk from their cows because it means we're making more money, but our cows are thriving when they're provided with an environment and an opportunity to produce milk, the way that their genetics have intended them to.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to switch over to talking about FarmES now. So I would imagine most people are familiar with the farm program from National Milk Producers Federation. FarmES is that environmental stewardship component. And so this is specifically a US based tool. So like with Cool Farm Tool, how there's anybody in the world can complete it, but it also has it can be used from, you can take a US assessment and you can compare it to others across the world, whereas FarmES is specifically US based and only US dairy farmers have access to this tool. It is run by, the background engine of it is the RUFUS model, or the Ruminant Farm Systems model, which, like I mentioned before, that Cool Farm Tool is an empirical model. FarmES is a process-based model. And they just went through an update about a year ago to this now process-based model, which basically is it follows the cows throughout the farm. It's simulating all the biological, chemical, and physical processes that are happening on the farm, and it's tracking the carbon through the farm. So that's kind of, when we talk about them, they're just inherently different. FarmES also now with its new version has some more advanced scenario planning. So I don't know if any of you have heard about a technology called livestock water recycling, but it's kind of a manure management system, and they have a pre-built scenario where you can transform your manure management system now into using LWR and to see what that impact would be. So those are just kind of some of the right off the bat, some of the differences that we see. But thinking more specifically, when we're talking about herd numbers now, so like I talked about previously when you have heifers off-site, how those were not included. FarmES models those. So we're looking at heifers that are on and off-site, but now there's also a distinction where we're looking at heifers as pre-weaning and then everything from weaning up until first calving. So when we think about data collection, we're capturing that data from you. It may be we're looking at, age at weaning and age at first calving to do some math in the background, or we're getting specific, dairy comp reports that have the breakdown by age for all of your young stock. So it just kind of depends. There's also an optional animal management section right now in FarmES where you can look at things like your, pregnancy rates, your breeding methods, culling percentages based off of, feet and legs or lameness or, milk production. So that's an optional section. But if you have that data, that's something that you can play into the model to see how that's impacting that overall score. The other big difference is now, instead of just looking at manure storage, it's almost it's the flow of the manure from the cow to its final resting place. So we're going to look at things like the housing system. So are you in a freestall barn, a tie stall barn, a bedded pack? Do you have manure separation? Where does that go? If you have a digester, what happens after the digester? Is there separation? So it's kind of more of a narrative story about what's happening and how you handle manure for each animal group, because it can be different across the farm. Energy, we're still looking for the same things. And then there's also a section about carbon trading, and within the carbon trading section is looking at renewable energy. So if you have solar on farm, if you have a digester and you're using that energy, if you have wind turbines, things like that, we can now model some carbon trading as well. So just in thinking about these, it's all the similar data, but it's how you plug and play it. That's what makes the models different and what makes the results different, but also what provides value in using them together as a pairing.
And I think that's a great way to bring it on home, Grace, is with these 3 different environmental tools that we work with, these are really some of the recognized and accepted authorities in terms of GHG modeling for your farm, for dairy farms in general. Thinking about eco practices being so great on the field side and so specific there in field and soil data. Cool Farm Tool being that internationally recognized tool, and then FarmES having that really in-depth look here for our American dairies.
So guys, we work with just a huge variety of fellow dairy farms. We've got the most progressive dairy farmers probably in the world. Sophisticated data, completely tracking everything, and all their records are electronic. And then we have still some small sole proprietor operations in the Midwest, specifically, I'd say in the South. And their record keeping system might be a mix of electronic and paper. How do you guys, when you come onto farm or when you're talking to producers, how do you collect and summarize that data?
Yeah, and again, with data collection, any sized farm, any type of sophistication in terms of data storage on farm can be quantified through these 3 different tools. And that's where some of our expertise and service lies. So working with the farms that we have, there are some that we talk to once and we get data from, a My John Deere and a Dairy Comp printout, and that's it and has all the data on it. And there are some that it's more of a longer phone call where, we talk through it, or, get pictures of even chicken scratches of things that are notes and written down. So there's, data can look like a lot of different things. It's just one of the things we just want to make sure to have the most accurate picture of what's actually going on farm. If we have good data inputs, we can get good data outputs through these different tools.
Awesome.
I think it's important to note that regardless of where you sit with your level of sophistication, that shouldn't be a hindrance. We pride ourselves in working in all those different scenarios that Carson just described. So don't feel, if you're interested in potentially, working with your farm, your footprint, don't feel that, oh, I don't have my John Deere and all of these sophisticated technologies that you can't participate, because we pride ourselves in meeting our farmers where they are, working with them, to get to that end goal.
Okay. So what else would you like to share with us?
That concludes the rest of our presentation. All we have here is just contact information. But otherwise, I mean, we're always happy to work with more farms, with new farms, and it's one of the things where if you're on the fence about it, please talk to the folks at PDP. Please reach out to us, and we can hopefully answer some of the questions that you might have around some of these different models.
So I have a couple questions. One, how long does and I know there's no such thing. I mean, I know this probably as well as anybody because we have such a gamut of producers, but what's the average that it takes to collect the data for you guys? What the average time?
Yeah. Again, it really just depends on what the farm data looks like. It could be as easy as an hour phone call a lot of times if that's how a farm chooses to do it. Otherwise, typically what I'd say is it's usually maybe 3 or 4 hours of getting all of the data together in terms of, talking to your power company, getting some of the kilowatt hours of electricity used, going back through diesel bills from your fuel retailer. So just some of the things like that again is all data, potential paperwork that you're gonna need to have when it comes to year end for write-offs. But just getting it in a form to send over to us.
Okay, give me an example of what are some of the farm practices that can actually lower my emission score?
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about the data collection in terms of dairy side and field side. And so we can have a similar conversation about practices that are going to impact that score. I can handle the field side as that's some more of my expertise in the Eco Practices platform, but it's really all the conservation practices, the conservation management practices that we think of. So reducing tillage, no-till, cover crops, manure applications, all of those things are going to be really beneficial in terms of lowering our net GHG emissions number.
Okay.
And I think, when we think about the dairy side specifically, so when we get our results, our three main components are feed production, enteric fermentation, and manure management. So, thinking about, ration optimization. So obviously everybody wants to use the least cost ration. So making sure that we're optimized with our nutritionists to make sure we're feeding what we need to optimize milk production. Manure management, composting is a great kind of more accessible manure management strategy rather than like saying, jumping everybody to a digester is not feasible. And so there are different manure management strategies that we can look at. And then, like I talked about with feed production, when we have the flexibility to reduce tillage, like Carson just talked about, that's going to reduce the emissions that are required to produce the feed that we feed to the cows.
How often should a farm go through? I know we're talking about right now getting a lot of farms just to get their baseline, but let's assume I have my baseline. How often should I look at and have this data recalculated and run through the models?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the conversations we have with the farms in terms of how often we should be re-upping our scores. Typically, what I say is if you are plugged into a different program, generally they might have an annual based data collection and modeling basis. So we work with plenty of companies that we're working with farms year over year and tracking progress as they potentially make changes on the farm. Otherwise, if you're doing it just for your own knowledge, it's great to have your baseline. And once you do, maybe after doing a bigger practice change, maybe having a bigger capital expenditure in manure management, maybe if a feed additive is put into your ration, that's the time to then look and compare and say, our baseline was here, we made this change. How did that affect our numbers on the backside?
Awesome. Okay. So then just to give you a summary, what I heard of these tools, there's two tools that are very common in the US. One is the USDA, the COMET program that really specializes in field by field. And the other one is the FarmES. And those are both US based and regional based tools, very excellent tools. And then the Cool Farm tool that Grace just talked about is an internationally recognized tool. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, so there's only one that's internationally recognized. Okay. And then when you're collecting, you're working with me as a dairy farmer. When you collect, you're collecting data that you're taking back, but you're running it in simultaneously to all three of these models. You don't come back to me 3 times and collect different sets of data. It is just that one time go. Is that correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. So we'll identify a given year. So the 2024 crop year per se, and the 2024 calendar year for the different dairy and field data. We'll collect data with you once, making sure that we have all the data needed to run these different tools. And then from there, it's all internally on our team for doing the data entry and the modeling.
Okay. I want to just say that's cool, just for pun intended. But that's cool, that's Comet, and that's FarmES. All of those are great tools, all a part of the initiative that was dairy farmer led initiative. And also, and that's what we're referring to, that initiative that belongs to the US dairy farmer, your farm, your footprint. What's really behind that is right now, there are dollars available for a limited time for dairy farmers to be able to have a majority of their cost of having the third-party reports and the third-party data collection done for them, up to about the first 2,500 acres of your farm. So if your farm is less than 2,500 acres, let's say it's 100 acres, it's going to cost you about $1 an acre versus considerably more to be able to get this. So for now, someone is actually paying for you to be able to, Dairies Foundation with the partnership from Nestle is paying for you to get data that only you will get for your farm. It's a nice opportunity. Why do we want to do that? We want our most progressive farms, especially our most progressive, but all of our dairies to have an opportunity to know where they are today so that because we know we've learned that we're very, very, very sustainable in the US, but we're always improving. So getting your baseline. So as you improve, you get credit for where you are at now, but you'll get credit in the future for lowering emissions and being more efficient. And that's what the US dairy farmer does the best. And that is we're always doing better and we're always learning. And once we know better, we do better. We just continually improve. So now is the time through an initiative that was started by dairy farmers for dairy farmers. Get your baseline. These guys, Carson and Grace, are part of the team that is that third party team that would help you collect the data. This program allowed you to learn about what is kind of behind the curtain with your farm, your footprint, and what are those 3 models that are utilized. Carson, Grace, what's the best way? I see your contact information. Do you prefer a phone call or do you prefer an email if I am a farmer that wants to dive into more questions? What's your mode of communications that you prefer?
Yeah, we've got both up there. We communicate with farmers all the time: phone call, text, email, anything. If you do have questions, if you are interested in signing up with your farm, your footprint, just go to PDP's website and then look at the sustainability tab, and there's a form there that'll send your information over to Shelly and her team, which then gets shot right over back to us to start that process.
And for the information for our fellow farmers that are sitting on the fence, there is a group of dairymen that went through the whole first series of this and before we even rolled it out, and they are also willing to work with you and help you answer some questions. The biggest thing is once you have your number, that number comes to you, and you decide what to do with it, but you can select to opt into a peer group of fellow dairy farmers where you can learn side by side. You share only the information that you want about your farm, but it's facilitated with people like Carson and Grace that understand how the models work. And what we've seen in these peer groups of your farm, your footprint participants is they're very interested into, let's say Carson and I are both dairy farmers. Hey, Carson, what's your number? Or Carson, what are you doing? Your number is lower than mine. I want to see if that practice would be applicable on my farm. And it's just a really unique opportunity to learn from one another, which is what the whole model of professional dairy producers is about, is to sharpen the saw with like-minded people that simply love the craft of dairying. So I see no additional questions coming in at this time, and we're at the top of the hour. I'd like to say thank you to Grace Moeller and Carson Duggar, and the whole team that backs at EOC. You have been a terrific resource for the dairy industry, and we're grateful and thankful. To our fellow dairy farmers, you got questions about your farm, your footprint, the grant that we can get out to your farm to help offset a majority of the costs for you to do this data discovery. Like Carson said, go to pdpw.org. It's on our website, or just simply pick up the phone and call us at the 800 number. That's 800-947-7379 PDPW. And you don't have to be a member. You don't have to become a member. You just have to be a dairy farmer to participate. So signing out from Professional Dairy Producers, we hope this information was helpful to you. If you have ideas of other information that you'd like to see on the Dairy Signal or just questions, always just contact us. We're here to help you be better at what you do. So thank you and make today your very best. We'll see you back here on the next Dairy Signal.